Hi everybody, my name is Hendrikson, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I faced and the lessons that I learned this summer during my internship as the Social Cognition and Communication intern for the Environmental Defense Fund. So some of the stuff that I worked on was researching guidelines and standards for communicating social determinants of health in environmental justice communities. I also wrote some blog posts on some internal research done by EDF staff, and I did a lot of research, preliminary research for a cognitive psychological study. But one of the biggest things that I learned throughout this whole summer is that writing is not as easy as I thought it would be. It is definitely a process and a journey, and it takes weeks of writing and constant editing, trying to understand things that are way above my head and trying to piece it all together to reach my goal and my audience. So the majority of the work that I did was on I guess it was a psychological study on the political polarization of climate science and how we can overcome some of these barriers by fostering cross-ideological communication and over a shared reality. So I wasn't there for the beginning of the process in the planning stage, but I was able to see a lot of the inner workings and what it actually takes in order to put together a study of this size. And so I was able to meet with a team of experts from a bunch of different universities and within the EDF community, psychologists and behavioral, cognitive, and political studies, environment experts, energy, and economics, but my portion of it was doing the groundwork and research in order to identify the location to which the study was actually going to take place. So the reason why I decided to take this position is because I've spent my entire life talking about climate change to opposing political views. So every holiday I go home to see my family, and whether it's sitting around the table, Thanksgiving dinner, opening presents, just playing cards, just small talk, talking about our small town, the weather, how fast the corn's growing this summer, or the windmill that they just put outside of town and how my grandpa is just complaining about how ugly it is. But it never fails that somebody says something wrong, I guess. Some sort of bad science, conspiracy theory, something that they read on Facebook. And I try to argue my point calmly, even use some sort of conservative or neutral framing in order to get my point across. But it never seems to work, and I'm definitely in the out group for sure. So inside of my mind, I'm screaming, trying to say look, this is what I do every single day. This is what I study. This is what I know. This is what I went to school for. And inevitably, my uncle will stand up every time I'm talking about my education and start preaching about the liberal agenda. And so, I have to deal with that. But then I feel like I'm talking to a brick wall. And so I turn to talk to my sweet grandmother, who's the only liberal-minded person in my family. And I'm like, I'll talk to her. She'll understand what I'm talking about. And turns out that she has the exact same opinions as all the conservatives in my family. It's just that she has a different perspective on a way to tackle these problems or a way to approach these problems. And so what I learned from this in, combining it with the work that I did this summer is that our perspectives are based on our experiences. And the experiences that we have in our regular everyday life, in the instance of my family in this small town, this small community, doesn't matter where you are in the political spectrum. It's all based on the things you know, the things you learn, and the way that you look at the world. So in realizing this, I recognize that local context matters. And in order to do this research over the summer, I had to become an expert. So we chose the state of North Carolina in order to do this study. And I won't go too in depth with what all is going on with the project because it's still ongoing and it hasn't actually happened yet. But North Carolina, there's a few major reasons why we decided to go there. Part of this experiment is coming up with some sort of a balance, kind of like a control of political views and population demographics, cultural diversity. North Carolina has a relatively equal distribution of Republican, Democrat, and unaffiliated voters compared to the rest of the country. More than 80% of their land is considered working land, consisting of mountain ranges, forests, wetlands, coastlands, agriculture lands. And they have a strong potential for climate change mitigation. And one thing that I found surprising is that North Carolina is considered the epicenter for the environmental justice movement. On top of all of that, I had to learn the history, partisan control, laws that are in place, justice, voting rights, demographics, poverty, education, military, cultural diversity. I had to learn about values, political, environmental, and family, religious values, sifting through dozens of surveys, news articles. Had to learn about environmental factors, employment and industry, agriculture, tourism, housing, energy monopolies, high-tech research and manufacturing, the potential for solar, wind, nuclear energy, grid resilience, electric vehicles, where government money goes, government programs and incentives. I learned about coal power and lithium mining, the pollution that it causes, the environmental justice issues that North Carolina faces, the threats to biodiversity and resource management, and the major flooding that is happening all across the state. And all of that was narrowed down to 2 counties. And that doesn't even include the work that the rest of the team has to do with finding the participants and designing the actual study. So just like when I turned to talk to my grandmother, thinking that she would believe or support any of my opinions, a lot of climate policy goes for the low-hanging fruit. They're looking for the biggest bang, the most efficient results, who is going to give the most amount of action and participation in order to implement the policy. But it turns out that most people have the same concerns, but have different opinions and act differently because of their different perspectives and experiences. So all of these research topics that I went through to identify a location are the same topics that are brought up in every single day communication. Small talk, small communities, and it is the basis of conversation that happens around the family dinners like I described with my family, and that brings local communities together. So making assumptions about knowing the audience or what you think you know about the audience is a fallacy. Understanding the audience is a process, and that is my lesson that I learned. And what's missing from this slide that wasn't on the other slide is potential, because potential comes from the understanding and cooperation. Our potential comes from the quality of our communication and the relationships that we build. Our potential to solve climate change comes from the recognition of our shared reality and our understanding of diverse perspectives. So unless you want to go through this whole process every time you want to talk to somebody or convince somebody of some sort of science, I recommend that you go with a different approach and break the barriers, ask questions, build relationships, because the science and action will follow if we just work together. So, thank you.